To digest some of that is Harry Quilter-Pinner. He is the Executive Director at the Institute for Public Policy Research. Good to see you. We should return to this issue of welfare and the impact assessment that we've had in the last hour or so. Let me just set it out for people. So 3.2 million families affected by the cuts to welfare spending that the Chancellor has announced. Among those, 370,000 people will lose out on the personal independence payment, the PIP payments. On average, across the board, people will lose out on £4,500. Is that the right decision?
Look, in a world of low or no growth and with the geopolitical pressures, there were no easy choices for the Chancellor today. So, I don't envy her the tough decisions. I think she's absolutely right to be saying, how can we make sure we get the most from every taxpayer pound spent? How do we make government more efficient? But we need to be really careful that when we're trying to get that efficiency, that we're not hitting people, the poorest, hardest. And I think there are some decisions in there that will have real impacts on people's lives, and that we should be thinking really carefully about the balance of cuts and taxation in order to balance the books. Yeah,
as we've already said to people, this wasn't your budget. Your budget in the autumn. There's no further tax increases in this statement that people need to know about. What they did say, though, was that they're going to crack down on tax avoidance. So they're setting out plans to increase the pursuit of tax fraudsters by 20%, which she thinks will bring in around £7 billion by the end of this Parliament. But in terms of general taxation, it's going to go even further, from about 35% to 37% in the next 2 to 3 years. That's an enormous weight on the British people.
It is. But we have to recognise that we've got growing pressures. So we've got growing demand on systems like the NHS at home, and we've got growing pressures on defence abroad, and that we have to make sure that we properly invest in the infrastructure, the public services, and the security that the British people need and expect. And that over time, that is going to require us to both make the government more efficient, but also to say we're going to have to raise more revenue. There have been some people that looked at Germany's decision to lift its borrowing rule and borrow more to fund defence, and saying, why aren't we doing the same? But the challenge here is Germany has a lower debt to GDP ratio, about 60%. We are over 100%. What Germany does differently is it taxes higher and taxes more and spends more on its public services as a result.
So the sort of social pact that they have in France, in a number of countries on the continent. So you're saying that actually this should be the beginning of a societal conversation about what we raise in taxation, and crucially who pays, and also what we pay on our own security.
Yeah, and Labour has already started that conversation. The last budget was a big tax-raising budget, and they've put that money into public services, and that is a start. So we have to recognise they're already doing this. But looking forward, I don't see how we have the end of the peace dividend, the need to put more money into defence, and we want to maintain a welfare state. In fact, we want to improve our welfare state because we know it's crumbling, without having a conversation about tax in the long term.
Yeah, but improve is the key word here, because as a former correspondent in Paris, I know full well, people are happy to pay their taxes so long as they get services on the other side of it. And if you've got problems like we have in the NHS and in our schools, people start to scratch their heads and say, well, why am I paying this?
Yeah, I think there are two conditions for having this conversation about tax differently. One is the government are right to say, unless the public feel that money is spent efficiently, they won't be willing to put their hand in their pocket and pay more tax, and that's absolutely right. And that means getting better services, showing that if we put more money in, we get better services out. And the second is we have to be able to go to the British public and say, we've asked the wealthy to pay their fair share first before we come and ask you to pay more, which is why the rule that they set out in opposition not to tax working people more is the right one at the moment. They can still get more tax revenue in the coming years if they want. Within their rules, there are taxes still left on the table that she can look at in the future.
But that brings us full circle to where we started, and the welfare cuts. If you're saying people want value for money, there is surely a moral argument about who is claiming benefits. I think most people, fair people, would want those who are genuinely disabled or unable to work to get benefits. That's why we pay our taxes. But if people are playing the system, then there should be reform. And they would point, I dare say, to the rising cost of welfare, up to around 100 billion by 2030, which many have said is unsustainable.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is the overall welfare budget is not rising. In fact, the Chancellor said today it's due to fall, so the overall budget is not rising. There are bits of it that are, so the money going towards people with disability and ill health. We do need to tackle that problem, And that means recognising that the cause of that is partly ill health. We need to make sure we're doing prevention better. We've got people can access the services they need in the NHS so that they can get better, but also so that the incentives are right within the system, and also that there's support for people who want to make the transition from a benefit into work. And they put £1 billion during that announcement towards support for people with mental health conditions or need support with skills. That's the right kind of thing to help these people make this transition, because most people don't want to sit on benefits. They want to work, but they might need support to get there.
Just on defence, as previously trailed, the defence spend will increase to 2.5%. They're giving an extra 2.2 billion for defence in the next financial year. 10% of that will be spent within the UK on higher tech products for the defence sector. Do you think there is an argument, as there was with net zero, to convince people that actually money that is being taken out of perhaps welfare or perhaps schools or other departments can be to the benefit of the UK economy if it's invested in defence?
So in opposition, Rachel Reeves talked about Securonomics, which was a strategy to invest in British business and to unlock manufacturing and industry in the UK, not just in London but across the country, through an industrial strategy. I think we're expecting that industrial strategy to be published in the coming months. That's a really key moment. We need that to be really ambitious, both on defence but also net zero, on pharmaceuticals. How do we make sure that British business is thriving across the country, creating good jobs, which is ultimately going to end up in people's pockets at the end of the day?
Harry Quilter-Pinner from the Institute for Public Policy, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts this afternoon.